70,000 light years from Earth. A Federation starship is trying to get home. In the Star Trek tradition, the adventures continue in Star Trek Voyager.
As the title for this video suggests, I'm going to get into why, of all the TV shows I could have possibly chosen to talk about for this YouTube channel, I went with Star Trek Voyager. And the answer for that is a little bit complicated, but I hope you'll bear with me. And if you're not particularly interested in that part, at the very least you can still watch this video for the honorable mentions, which will be towards the end. For quite a while, it was tough for me to come up with a way to describe my relationship with Star Trek Voyager. For the longest time, I simply regarded it as the red-headed bastard stepchild of the franchise, and only the second worst of the live-action television series because Enterprise existed. But in recent years, I've actually found little new things to appreciate about the show. Also new things to not like about the show, but I'll get more into that in a minute. Thanks in large part to an internet reviewer who goes by the name SF Debris. And it was, in fact, an SF Debris review, specifically for the Voyager episode Rise, that perfectly described my relationship with the show.
And I think that part of that is that my relationship with the show is different. I'm not a fan of Voyager, despite the fact that I have been involved in a complicated relationship with this show for 22 years now.
Yep, it's complicated. That is a great way to do it. A complicated relationship. Recently, for reasons, and also for the first time since it originally aired on the now-defunct UPN network, I rewatched the entirety of Star Trek Voyager on Netflix. I mean, I have the DVDs now, but I didn't at the time, and I only have them now because they belonged to my late father, but that's beside the point. I rewatched the show for two reasons. One, because I'd actually wanted to for a long time, for years at least, just because it was one of the two Star Trek shows that I hadn't rewatched. I'd seen the entirety of original series, Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, and even the animated series multiple times. But I'd never rewatched Voyager, or Enterprise for that matter. And then a strange little thing happened. I got the idea in my head for a Star Trek Voyager fanfic, of all things. And because my mind is weird, I got this idea from two SF Debris jokes. First, from the review for the episode Shattered.
There's a big speech before they're all sent back to their times, and Janeway asks Chakotay one thing.
Just how close do we get?
Not enough to satisfy the shippers, that's for sure. Don't worry, you'll get to hump a holographic Irish barkeep.
And then from the review for the episode Bliss.
No one is except for Naomi, who's leery about the idea of going to a world that she's only ever heard about and possibly having to leave Voyager. I mean, she's too young to understand. Or Janeway's manipulating her into becoming her minion. I mean, when was the last time you saw Ensign Wildman alive, huh?
They're all acting strange. Even Mom.
It's like she's a hologram pretending to be my mom, but Captain Janeway says moms usually flicker when they're happy, and so will I someday. After all, the dolphin doesn't fall far from the tree.
Watching these reviews, I got the idea to do a fic about a romance between... Stick with me, okay? I'm not going to talk too much about shipping, calm down. A romance between the characters of Seven of Nine and Ensign Samantha Wildman, Naomi's mother. My reasoning for that was that certainly would make more sense than the Seven Chakotay relationship that was so out of nowhere in the last few episodes of the series that even the actors had no idea it was coming. And from what I hear, neither of the actors particularly liked the idea either, which is kind of amazing that while there's not much chemistry between the two in the episode Endgame, what little is there is kind of a testament to the dedication that Jerry Ryan and Robert Beltran actually had to their craft. Especially surprising from Beltran, considering He was the actor who, for the majority of the series run, clearly gave the least amount of fucks. Anyway, once I decided that I had to do this fic, after months of my brain being inundated with, well, how would this episode have gone? How would this episode have gone? You know, what would have happened in this episode if they were together? Yada, yada, yada. And eventually it's just like, okay, brain, if I write it down, will you leave me alone? And to make the fic as faithful to the show as possible, I decided to rewatch the series from the beginning, including the 3 seasons that Jerry Ryan wasn't on the show. And that fic became the almost 400,000-word epic, A Fire of Devotion. I'm not going to talk a lot about the fic here. I gave you the basics of what it's about, although obviously at that length there's a little more to it than just the Sam-Seven relationship. But while I was watching Voyager, or rather rewatching Voyager for the purposes of this fic, that's where the complicated relationship comes in. Because I did find, like I mentioned before, things to like and things to hate about the show that I hadn't picked up on when it was originally airing. But conversely, I also found that some things that I didn't like when I was watching it, largely because I was still a teenager at the time, I actually liked now that I was older and could appreciate them more. But also some things that I liked at the time, I was clearly too dumb to pick up on how stupid they were, and I hated them now. So, again, complicated. I found more things to like, and less things to like, and more things to hate, and less things to hate. If there is a better word for it than complicated, I ask you to please leave it in the comments for me, because I do like my language to be as precise as humanly possible. So, while I do still rank Voyager as 4th of the 5 completed live-action Star Trek shows, and of course I say completed because Discovery is about to launch while I'm recording this, little more than a month away now, and as I understand it, the entire first season is already filmed, if not almost completely filmed. It is a higher 4 than it used to be. Now that may seem like a silly thing to say, it's like, 4th place is just 4th place, but I don't really view it that way. I mean, your ranking system is your ranking system. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong if you don't view these things the way that I do. But there it is. Still in 4th place, but a higher 4th place. In some ways, a better show than I remembered it. In other ways, a worse show than I remembered it. But at the end of the day, I think maybe because much worse Trek has come along, mainly the first 2 seasons of Enterprise, and that toilet grenade that was Into Darkness, I hold Voyager in higher estimation now than I used to. And, honestly, with the exception of a handful of episodes, even when it's not good, it's still enjoyable. Not even just in the making fun of it way, although that's there too, but also because, it's harmless action. Granted, harmless action is not normally a thing that one associates with Star Trek, but hey, there you go. And besides, another thing I've come to realize in my adulthood is that the phrase real Trekkie is complete bullshit. Star Trek, it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and it's not really my place to tell someone that their idea of what Star Trek is wrong. It just isn't. If you came to the franchise by way of the toilet grenade Into Darkness, that's fine. If you came to it through Enterprise, that's fine too. I'm not going to judge you. We both like Star Trek, so we're both Trekkies. Period. Star Trek snobs can go directly to hell. Do not pass go, do not collect 200 bars of gold-pressed latinum. And thus, you have why I have chosen Star Trek Voyager for this series of videos on my channel about TV shows. I may do others at some point. Maybe, maybe not. I mean, if you watched the recent channel update video, you'll realize that I'm still somewhat on the fence about doing another season of Shameless Cash Grab. But, as my late father would say, we'll burn that bridge when we cross it. So now that we've got the why out of the way, let's talk about the honorable mentions. And then in part 2 of this series, I'll discuss the first 5 of my top 10 personal favorite Voyager episodes in air date order. And then the third and final video will be for the second 5 of those top 10 episodes.
Over 21 million viewers witnessed the launch of Voyager. Now, after 7 years, this chapter in the Star Trek saga is coming to a close.
Live long and prosper.
My only mission is trying to get Voyager home.
I wish to expand my knowledge of humanity.
Finding one's heart is the surest road to individuality.
I've lost every family I've ever had.
You have a new family now. Try to beam her out.
Somebody help me!
UPN invites you to beam on board for the final climactic episodes. It's all leading up to May's biggest event, the 2-hour series finale of Star Trek Voyager.
Everybody on Voyager has showed a courage far beyond what I could have expected.
You were there when it began,
We're doing everything we can to bring you home.
but you can't imagine how it will end. Star Trek Voyager, the final season.
Our first honorable mention is the Season 1 episode, State of Flux. I gotta give kudos to the producers on this one for not having the traitor in the episode be a one-off guest star. Having introduced the character of Seska, the Bajoran who turned out to have been a Cardassian spy, made the reveal actually have a little bit more weight, and it's an example of the kind of potential that this show had, and sadly all too often wasted. Interesting note, Martha Hackett, the actress who played Seska, said in later interviews that she wished that she'd known that her character in Chakotay had a romantic past, because if she had, she would have played Seska differently in her earlier episodes. Next honorable mention, Season 2's Meld. I like this episode pretty much entirely for Brad Dourif. What else can you say? He's Brad Dourif. Even if something he's in is bad, he makes it interesting by his presence. He's just one of those actors. And I think he especially shined here. In fact, some could argue that he was too good for this show. Still in Season 2, we get the first and best of the 3 Voyager Q episodes. Not that that's exactly a high bar, the other 2 were terrible, but Death Wish actually is a pretty good episode. John Delancey was fantastic as usual, which goes to show how bad the other 2 Voyager Q episodes were, because even he couldn't save them. The guest star playing the character Quinn is likable, and the show takes an uncharacteristically nuanced view on the issue of suicide as opposed to the usual ham-fisted approach that, well, let's face it, Star Trek in general tended to take. Not the best Q story ever, but it does manage to be better than the Deep Space Nine episode, or even the lesser of his TNG appearances. We are not out of Season 2 yet, though, with our next honorable mention, Deadlock. A better-than-average Voyager outing that came so close to being in the top 10, but I ended up dropping it because it does suffer not so much for what happens in the episode, but for what doesn't happen after the episode, which is any sort of follow-up whatsoever. Not even lip service. A common problem with this show, I know, but this episode suffers more than most from it due to the massive amount of potential for existential drama and philosophical discussion, the kind of thing that the original series was masterful at its best, that was brought up by the episode's ending. But hey, at least the episode did give us the birth of Naomi Wildman, one of a small handful of child characters on Star Trek that don't actually suck. Next up in Season 3, a bit of an anvilicious episode, but a case of some anvils need to be dropped. Forgive me for my trope speak. It is also a rare B'Elanna-centered episode that isn't about her temper, and it gets points for not wrapping up everything neat and tidy by the end, but not being a total downer either. Closer to the middle of Season 3, we get the rare good Neelix episode in Fair Trade. While the episode does have its problems, the concept alone, plus Ethan Phillips getting a chance to really show that he's a better actor than many of the scripts he was given, made this one a candidate for the top 10, but it fell a little short compared to some of the others. But the basic idea, Neelix being afraid that he'll be kicked off the ship once Voyager leaves the area of the Delta Quadrant that he actually knows, makes for some good storytelling. Our next couple of honorable mentions come from the end of Season 3 and the start of Season 4. First up, Distant Origin. Yes, the questionable, even by Trek standards, science aside, it is an enjoyable episode. The race introduced is interesting, and it's actually kind of a shame we never got to see them again. And bonus points for not taking the easy way out, and for the rare instance of having a Kirk-style speech not work. Not due to bad writing, but due to the obstinance of the people the speech is being delivered to. As for the end of Season 3 and start of Season 4, Scorpion Parts 1 and 2. Yes, this is another one that kind of suffers in retrospect, specifically the defanging of Species 8472 later on in the episode In the Flesh, but I still remember to this day what a whoa moment it was at the time to see the Borg, of all people, getting their asses handed to them. Yeah, you know, before the major villain decay they suffered in future Voyager appearances. But I mean, at the time, seeing, like, you know, 2 Borg cubes get blown up before they could even finish their standard introduction in that teaser, probably one of the best cold opens that not just Voyager, but I think Star Trek in general ever had. The Killing Game, Parts 1 and 2. Solid 2-parter, undermined a little by having the Hirogen basically just be a talky version of the Species from the Predator films, and it drags in a few places in the second half, but it is an enjoyable romp that overcomes its plot inconsistencies. The follow-up on this stuff in this Season 7 episode, Flesh and Blood, not great, but not enough to ruin Killing Game retroactively. Still a lot of fun, and hey, Jerry Ryan has a nice singing voice. Counterpoint is an episode from the following season, and features one of those rare entities in, well, honestly, in 1-hour dramatic television in general, the one-episode romance that isn't stupid. All too often, when a character in one of these types of shows meets a new love interest and that actor isn't a member of the main cast, it's safe to say we're not going to be seeing them by the end. But while that is true with this episode as well, it still feels earned in the end, both the romance and the end of it, due in part to the episode being fairly well written, and for Kate Mulgrew getting a chance to really show her chops. I know I say this a lot, but a lot of the times the actors on this show really did deserve better, and Mulgrew is a prime example of that. Still in Season 5, we get another... Okay, I did not realize this until I was recording this, but I wrote the words enjoyable romp for this one as well. I seem to be using that phrase a lot in some of my scripts of late. But you know what? Enjoyable romp probably applies more to Bride of Chaotica than it does to The Killing Game. The episode's a fun little homage to the sci-fi serials of the 1930s, while poking fun at them a little bit too. You could argue about the plausibility of the premise of the episode, but any plot hole that exists there is made up for by just how fun it is to watch. And our last honorable mention comes from Season 6, the last of the episodes that Ron Moore wrote for Voyager before quitting, and it is somewhat of a shame that this episode started life as a rejected Worf script over from Deep Space Nine, but Barge of the Dead is probably... No, actually, no, I'm not even going to say probably. It absolutely is the best B'Elanna Torres-centric episode of the entire series. Because it doesn't fall into any of the 3 main things that a B'Elanna story was. That she was either hitting something, having sex with someone, or fixing something. And it was also an interesting look at Klingon spirituality and their concept of the afterlife. So, with all the honorable mentions out of the way, tune in next time, whenever that ends up being, for the first 5 of my top 10 personal favorite Star Trek Voyager episodes in air date order.